A good trilogy is a thing of beauty. Indiana Jones, Evil Dead, Romero's first 3 Dead flicks, Star Wars, Aliens, Alien 3, On a Generous Day, The Matrix. Alright, okay. So a lot of those franchises have busted out of the trilogy box. They milked them, dragged that backstory out. No longer do audiences care who shot first. They need to know what Han had for breakfast on his 17th birthday. Stretch it out, you filthy franchise. The point is, things work best in threes, at least to me's. It's a good balance if the powers involved can stick the landing. In my eyes, the first should establish and resolve everything. Raiders of the Lost Ark, A New Hope, separate stories, no tenuous threads. The second, or middle chapter, is where things can get a bit wild. Temple of Doom is batshit crazy, a new world with a strange plot. Things kick into high gear because we already know the main character. Empire Strikes Back is the same. The desert dunes replaced with snowy landscapes and filthy marshes. Instead of space battles, it concludes with dramatic stuff on a city in the clouds. Jedi returns to Tatooine. The Last Crusade brought back religious artifacts and Nazi villains. The Sand Setting, Raiders, then the Thrill Ride, Temple of Doom. Crusade brought back the desert. Full circle. Technically, the dates are mixed up, but you get the idea. A good trilogy ends with a bang. It doesn't matter if a fourth is added. Lucas can ruin anything.
I don't think the system works.
When it comes to video games, my brain immediately thinks of the original trilogies on the NES. Simon's Quest was a wild departure sandwiched between 2 very similar titles. The first and third Mario entries sharing a lot more in common than the second, but that's because the sequel we got over here wasn't supposed to be a Mario game at all. Super Mario 2 is actually a reskin of Doki Doki Panic with alterations. You see, the Mario 2 that dropped in Japan was very similar to the original Super Mario Bros. And far too difficult for Western audiences. Howard, a cartoon character from the Nintendo Power Comics, said no way to that one, no way. A new coat of paint and some Mario-like gameplay was added to Doki Doki Panic, so it could be repackaged as Mario 2 over here also. Did you know Alucard is actually Dracula spelled backwards? Kaboom! BioShock! Though as a series, this one shares more in common with the Back to the Future trilogy, with the first 2 ostensibly telling the same story before getting experimental with the third. Am I making any sense? The Dark Souls series is the best we've had in years across all mediums, with the second game being the outlier. It was smart for the powers involved, the almighty Miyazaki, to end things after 3, a tidy amount, callbacks, fan service, Dark Souls 3. I have some opinions about the way they decided to wrap things up, but the point is, they did. Well, sorta. Say what you will about Dark Souls 2 and its slapdash disjointed world, but it tried. It had new ideas. Not all of them worked, but at least it didn't rely heavily on fan service to tickle your treat centers. The Kingsfield series follows the same trajectory, but in my humble opinion, I think this final PlayStation 1 installment sticks the landing a lot better. Trilogies in film, trilogies in games, music trilogies.
Yeah, well, it's part of a trilogy, really, a musical trilogy.
ELP trilogy, Zelda 1, 2, 3. 2 top-down buns of adventure with a neglected outsider Patty nestled in the middle. Kingsfield 1, the real one, released exclusively in Japan, sprawling, horizontal, flat, with a story that has a beginning and an end. The other one, the Western one, which is really the sequel, had a different protagonist, a new land to explore, with an entirely different vertical feel. Do you prefer your ramen in a wide bowl with room to breathe, or stuffed into a tall cup, packed in tight? Pick your poison. Watermelon poison. Kingsfield 3 or 2, if you're an animal, dropped in 1996. It makes an attempt to recontextualize the relatively flat, sprawling floors that were predominant in the original and congested crisscross corridors of its sequel. The result? Long stretches of horizontal plains separate intricately designed puzzle box dungeons. Hills exist, and there are many more enemies, but this is still the same old Kingsfield. The MacGuffin of this series has been the Moonlight Sword. Jean Alfred Forrester receives the blade while searching for his father in the land of Verdite's royal cemetery. An unknown evil is vanquished, darkness subsides, and he takes the throne as king. A number of years later, the blade is stolen, and Forrester's friend Alexander volunteers to retrieve it from the cursed island of Melanat. Gira and Seath, two opposing gods who thought introducing religion to the world would be a good idea, ultimately become two sides of the same coin. Gira, a black dragon figure represented by the Moonlight Sword, and Seath, the white with the Dark Slayer. At the end of Kingsfield 2, we witness the two blades cross one another. 2 decades later, a curse possesses our friend King Alfred, which forces Alexander to seal him within the castle of Verdite, but not before the once noble king destroys his former ally. Lyle, the king's son, gets word of what's going on and begins his own quest to save what's left of Verdite, his father still locked within the confines of the castle. Leon, Lyle's caretaker, equips the young would-be hero with the X-Selector.
What?
A great weapon with connections to the mystical god blades. It certainly beats the hell out of the rusted rubbish the player started out with in the previous adventures. You are Lyle. We're in Verdite, and most of the remaining citizens can't stand you for obvious reasons. Sally! This is it, the final chapter in the Verdite trilogy, and it's wonderful. More enemies, more environments, more weapons, more NPCs with more stories to tell. Don't expect me to explain the fundamentals of combat or how returning items work. There are 2 other Kingsfield videos on this channel that cover those things. We're here to explore what makes this game different and why I consider it to be a satisfying conclusion to the Verdite story. There's so much story here compared to its predecessors, and pages of text. These people ramble more than I do. Like, easy guy, I just asked where the nearest inn was. It's located exactly 6 kilometers sex from here. Gotcha, pal. Looks like we're stuck with the orb compass again, huh? Wonderful. As I mentioned, the world layout is an amalgamation of the 2 we've seen before. Think Zelda 2. Caves, dungeons, and temples exist, scattered across a vast open world. Gated regions locked behind environmental blockades, or in this game's case, the occasional shrub. Forrester isn't exactly an apt surname for this Lyle fella, you know? I get it. I mean, it takes a lot of ingenuity and effort to cordon off certain areas so players don't get overwhelmed, but really, we're going with this. How about a giant boulder or a lava pit? Being blocked by something so frail takes me out of this game a bit, but I can forgive this for being a relatively early example of a first-person console adventure. I'm less lenient when stuff like this appears in modern titles. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Dark Souls 2, and your knee-high, mid-game rubble barrier. Would it have been too much to just extend the wall from the gate to this point? It bugs me more than it should. Sorry, citizens, I'd have liked to save the world from darkness and all, but this minor inconvenience, it sort of popped up. That dungeon? Sure, no problem. Busted up minecart tracks over pools of skin-melting lava? Yeah, I'm not sweating it. I'll just Skyrim spaz my way through. Just keep those brittle branches out of my way. Impossibly impassable. Watch out for that stream! Come on, Lyle. A babbling brook? Vast, hilly terrain separates the denser indoor labyrinths. Lengthy, empty corridors mask load times, so you're free to explore uninterrupted. Occasionally, I'd experience a brief stutter when exploring a new region, but these weren't intrusive enough to mar my experience. The frame rate is a lot more consistent. Proof that From Software learned a few tricks in the short gap in between games. This is particularly notable as the screen now fills up with a multitude of baddies in any given area. Explosions, projectiles, and a variety of different enemy types accost Lyle at every turn, so it's nice that everything runs so swiftly. Combat is more or less identical, but there have been a few well-implemented tweaks. Enemies are extremely aggressive and more competently programmed. Projectiles often get flung from every direction, creating some dynamic scenarios. It's no Doom, but there's more to dodge, and simply swiveling around the monsters won't get you quite as far in this third outing. I mean, yeah, it still works, but sometimes you'll need to deke an opponent by baiting an attack attack and circling the opposite way. A few even have some defensive techniques. Skeletons use shields, duck out of the way of incoming melee swings, and others have devastating close quarters moves to keep you at a distance. The majority of the combat scenarios are well conceived, but a few late game arenas push the boundaries when it comes to fairness. Enemies aren't as restricted as the player when it comes to magic and stamina management. Take this room for instance. You beam in and boom, an immediate cacophony of explosions, and damage drains quicker than any human can react to. It's hard not to sloppily tank hits while spamming spells and gobbling up health herbs with the use of the handy quick item prompt. These instances are rare but worth mentioning as they seem systematically placed in areas that are fair distances from save points. It's unnecessary. The game is long and challenging enough without this nonsense. Fortunately, save stations are far more generously placed. Dragon crystals still automatically send you back to a safe location against your will upon death, which I don't know. Clearly I'm missing the importance of this outside of an extra life because it's the second consecutive time they've added this feature. Like, what's the point when you can reload a save from any location? Gates and their correlating warp keys have been replaced with Icarus items, early game artifacts required to unlock future areas that double as teleportation devices. Each of these warps Lyle to a specific location. Leon, the decrepit pickle person, will eventually assemble these 3 fragments into a handy-dandy gadget that enables the player to freely choose between several locations to fast travel. Definitely one of the handiest tools in the game, and using it no longer consumes MP. I've gotta hand it to the developers for including a comprehensive map so early. It's one of those Super Metroid fill-in-the-spaces-as-you-go kind of deals, and it's easily the most useful item. Other maps can be found, but this pixie one is the most useful as it makes a lot of the necessary backtracking easier to stomach. Kingsfield 3 is more linear than its predecessors, but the dungeons can still be confusing. A lot of the palace, labyrinth, temple, dungeon caverns have a unique theme. They never go full Zelda, but some include basic puzzles. Light these, flick that, wear those to cross this after turning a dial here. Nothing too complicated, but they're good little distractions. Rhombus keys have been replaced with Silviera ones. Reusable, exciting, tons of key puzzles. Most of the environments look different. Textures, colors, patterns. A few late game regions look really nice with well-drawn details. Lumpy floors and corrugated walls are a bit unusual, but they serve a purpose. Hidden passageways have been a big deal since the inception of this series. Personally, I've never really had a problem rubbing up against every wall and clicking action, but this third entry definitely does away with a lot of the guesswork by having distinctions. As far as I can tell, the flat surfaces are the only ones that potentially hold secrets, doors, compartments, and traps. God damn it, these spikes mean business this time. Instant death if you're a lower level. I love the way this game looks. Some could argue that the colors are a bit muted, and I'm not sure if this was a compromise the developers had to make to get things to run smoothly, but I dig. It gives everything a nice watercolor aesthetic that I definitely appreciate. Enemies are more detailed. It's a greatest hits package featuring redesigned creatures from the previous Kingsfield games, as well as a heap of new ones. Old Man Pixie Blizzard, Rock Golems, Tektites, Snow Cyclops, Legless Viking Santas, unholy, the creepiest ghosts in any of these games, deadly daffodils who animate like puke-prepping felines. This game's got it all. Monsters suit their surroundings. Crawly plants and mushrooms inhabit the grassy plains. Demons in dungeons. A variety of ghosts in catacombs and graveyards. Frost-casting baddies in the tundra regions, and many more. It gives the world an immersive, lived-in feel. New enemies appear until the very last area in the game, half a dozen introduced in the final castle alone. Certain areas even switch up the baddie variety when revisited. Bosses unceremoniously appear, with the majority still being larger versions of regular baddies. You'll just sort of bump into them as you explore the many different areas, and there are a lot more of them this time. Giant stone golems drop items that can be crafted by the slowest blacksmith in gaming history. You'll get to choose what he upgrades, and it's kind of clever that he doesn't build stuff instantly, but it just takes too long. I get that they were going for a bit of realism here, but it's inconveniently tucked away in a cave that I rarely had a reason to revisit, so he still has some of my gear as I do this review. Have you ever brought something in to get repaired and just forgot about it? I mean, I have, and this situation is like that, so I guess this is as realistic as it gets. Inns can be rested at, and they help push events forward. For instance, a short mandatory quest at the beginning has the player collect a special herb to give to an old hag so she can save her dying child. Lodging nearby for the night will advance the plot. Pretty typical RPG stuff, but it's still the first time we've seen it in this series. Dream images appear while resting, and these change depending on where you're at in the story. Good stuff. More personality has been given to all of the NPCs. Characters reference events that occurred in the other two games, and their dispositions change depending on your actions. Like at the beginning, most of these folks don't trust you. I mean, your pops did go bad and ruin the entire kingdom, so it's hard to blame them. Some are quite hostile, but if you do good deeds, their affection can be earned over time. Killing them is an option as well, but doing so will have consequences. I seriously considered murdering this digging guy. He belittled me the entire time I was out there doing the work, and just couldn't be impressed no matter how great I became. Surely no one would notice if I popped him over the head with a mace. He's off in this quiet corner all alone. Would anyone even care? Let's just do it, man. Say one more unfriendly thing, you swine, I swear to Christ. What's with FromSoft and digging? Anyway, the first Kingsfield had a guy. This one, Dark Souls 2, I really enjoy noting the similarities. The real Dark Souls starts here. Headless Vanguard soldiers, new Londo spooky specters, humanoid snake creatures, gigantic garden creatures who spew poison mists. Not so fun, guy. I mentioned how the rhombus keys reminded me of Dark Souls 2's Pharos Lockstones in the previous video, but here, in Kingsfield 3, finite key items can be used to unlock passageways and set into pedestals, making them the real progenitors. Sentient shrooms, the first of the crestfallen characters. Boo-hoo. Bridge building guy. Horsehead. Okay, that's a Zelda 2 one, but clearly this is just Mazrua. Am I right? Petrified blockades. Poison popping trap treasures. Elden Ring represent. This company loves reminding the player. Those who think Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring have lots of references to previous titles might find it interesting that they were doing this as far back as this Kingsfield game. This is a pretty big spoiler, so click ahead if you'd like. I don't know, like the 30 or 40 minutes. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
There's a lovely elf lady who has a special connection to Alexander, the protagonist from the second game. She does everything she can to help you succeed, and there are some serious hints that she's fond of Lyle. When bad things eventually happen to her, because of course they have to, I was legitimately gutted. Her arc is the Artorias and Sif, or Maiden Astrea plot of Kingsfield 3. An item found on her body can be used on a suspicious-looking fountain that resembles the one from the first game. Using it on this recognizable landmark reveals Alexander's spirit, who guides you to the royal cemetery, the same place the entire first game takes place in. It has been recreated here and largely optional. Cave inns cleverly prevent full exploration of these tunnels, but the levels are still recognizable. The secret cubby housing the wooden shield guarding skeleton is still here, and a lot of the enemies return. I was already enjoying this game a lot, but this entire area pushed me into considering it one of my favorites of all time. Such reverence, so much care to this tale without having to force me to sit through lengthy cutscenes. It's brilliant. This trilogy is easily up there with some of my favorites in the entire medium. This was my reward for playing through all three games in order. Easily missed, almost entirely optional, and so satisfying. The music that plays throughout is an amalgamation of two predominant tracks from the other games. Sound Kids Corporation worked on the score, led by series legends Koji Endo and Kaoru Kono, with Takashi Aoki, Yasushi Kawakami, and Yasunobu Suzuki assisting. This soundtrack is a bit more traditional, orchestral, with a lot of interesting pieces. One in particular has a real old school Doctor Who sci-fi thing going on. Overall, another excellent collection of music that deserves more credit than it gets. Oh, and it continues to play while you're in the menus, so that makes this game perfect. There's more chit-chat here than before, but again, it's hardly intrusive. A few cutscenes push the beats of the story along, but no more than your typical modern Souls adventures. Some are simply gorgeous to look at, such as the ones that play out when a new elemental magic is learned. Fire, light, earth, wind, water, all of these are taught after walking through special portals hidden across the world. Crystals are found and consumed to level a specific magic, but be careful not to pop one until you've learned the basics. Otherwise, it gets wasted. Buffs, projectiles, they're all the same as before with a few tweaks. Wind Cutter. Light is extremely useful. It costs next to no MP, and rightfully so, as monsters will constantly cast dark on you. Status effects last a lot longer this time around, and this particular spell makes it impossible to see anything. Pitch black. Poison, paralyze, curse, these are all devastating and can easily ruin your day if you're not properly prepared. It's simple to track your magic experience thanks to a helpful weather channel stats counter in the menus. It's also possible to reread conversations as all of them get logged into a personal diary of sorts. Items, weapons, and gear have descriptions as well, but some require a bit of knowledge before they are explained. I know that doesn't really make any sense, but let's just say it this way. Similarly to Fatal Labyrinth, you'll need to sometimes get some experience with something before the game tells you what it does. Does that make more sense? I don't know. The Truth class returns to fill in all of the other blanks. Unfortunately, it's still a chore to match weapons and armor stats. You'll still need to memorize numbers while clicking through the menus. Keys have always been a problem to cycle through, but at this point, 3 games in, it has become an indefensible oversight that they aren't given their own separate menu. There are so many chests to unlock and too many door puzzles reliant on specific keys for them not to occupy their own space in the items loadout. Having to cycle through this inventory page is just a slog, and the new text that yells at you when you get one wrong stays on the screen way too long. Yeah, I know I did it wrong. Another minor gripe I have is how some important items are just lying on the floor. It can be tough to see them due to the strange textures. There are so many empty gotcha chests. Surely they could have just put these goodies in them. There are 2 endings narrated by the best voice artist who have ever voiced over a voiceover. If you put in the effort, you'll be rewarded with an extra boss and closing cinematic. Stick around after the end card in this video to hear this dude speak. It is wild, but obviously a spoiler. The best voice artist. What a satisfying trilogy. Like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, this series concludes in a graceful way. Of course, I know there are more titles in both franchises, but I've chosen to ignore that 4th Indiana Jones, and Kingsfield 4 tells its own tale. This is the Verdite trilogy. It has its problems, and the games show their age, but we all do. Hell, I used to be a damn good athlete, but nowadays I'd be lucky to get my socks on without grunting in arthritic pain. Things get old, but like me, this franchise aged beautifully. I'd easily place these games up there with the best Zelda titles and think they do a better job sticking the landing than the Dark Souls trilogy. And I'm just talking about 1, 2, 3. I'm not talking about Demon Souls because that game's a masterpiece and Elden Ring is its own can of worms. In these games, things get better as you progress, and I really can't recommend playing through this excellent, underappreciated franchise from the very beginning. Patience and perseverance are required, but they're well worth your time. For now, a bit of a break from these longer games. At some point, I'll return to Kingsfield and other adjacent FromSoft titles, but these reviews take a lot of effort to produce. Next time on this channel, something completely different. So stay tuned.
Prince of Light had triumphed, and the destiny of the light had been fulfilled. A lone figure shone in the brilliant sun. Reposed in reverie, he seemed to be listening to something coming from the very light itself.
Brightly does the fire of light burn within your heart, Austin Lyle Forrester. Long have I waited for such a line to be born, after quell the darkness born in the hearts of man and beasts alike. As long as your line may reign, you shall be known as the Golden Kings, and peace shall reign in your world. With the lesser paths of power coming into alliance, there's no longer need of me. I will finally return to Silval. Your courage and vigilance has returned the light to your world. For this, I grant you back the life of your queen-to-be. The darkness enveloped Lynn's body, but her spirit remained pure to the light. Peace, Golden King.